The idea of doing a female version of Batman dates back to the 1950s, when DC Comics was placed in a bit of a bind. While sales on the book were fine, the public image of the dynamic duo was a little dubious. Namely, it was the theory that Batman and Robin were homosexuals. The theory popularized by Frederick Wertham in his book Seduction of the Innocent. This led DC Comics to introduce a love interest of sorts, in the form of Batwoman, who debuted in issue number 233 of Detective Comics. Now, I say of sorts because there really wasn't a formal relationship between Batman and Batwoman, and really any romance really didn't extend further than just the occasional kiss on the cheek. Batwoman was the nom de plume of Kathy Kane, an heiress and former circus performer who took up crime fighting to attract the attention of Batman. Much like the Dark Knight, Kathy used a combination of martial arts and tools from her utility purse. Look, it was the 1950s. I mean, this wasn't the bastion of feminist ideals going on at this era. I mean, Wonder Woman herself had to have more of her adventures revolve around Steve Trevor because of the concerns over her sexuality. In Batman issue number 139, dated April 1961, Kathy Kane would be joined by her niece Betty Kane, who had deduced her aunt's secret identity. Betty would become Batgirl, spelled with a hyphen, and a respected love interest for Robin, though, once again, no formal romance ever really took place between the two. Batwoman and Batgirl would appear consistently until 1964, when new editor Julius Schwartz deemed that Batman needed a retooling into a less silly character, and the two characters were retired along the likes of Batmite and Ace the Bat Hound. That being said, they didn't entirely disappear. The two would reappear in the mid-1970s, with Batwoman being semi-retired and Batgirl briefly joining the western branch of the Teen Titans, until the book was cancelled 4 issues later. Then in 1986, DC rebooted their entire comic universe with the Crisis on Infinite Earths event. This reboot all but erased Kathy Kane's exploits as Batwoman from the history of the DC universe, but Betty Kane would actually still be around, as she would pick up a new guise called Flamebird. The name Flamebird actually has a legacy that dates back to the Superman comics. Now, in one adventure, Jimmy Olsen and Superman became trapped in the bottled Kryptonian city of Kandor. Kandor was still stuck under a red sun, which meant Superman had no powers, and thanks to a misunderstanding, he got declared a fugitive. This led him and Jimmy Olsen to adopt the mantles of Flamebird and Nightwing. Now, as many of you know, Dick Grayson, aka Robin, would eventually take the form of Nightwing, and thus, this is why Betty Kane became Flamebird. In her new backstory, Betty Kane was a spoiled tennis prodigy who became infatuated with Robin after seeing a report about him in the Teen Titans. She took up the mantle of Flamebird not too terribly long after Grayson transitioned into the role of Nightwing. In the wake of the 2005 crossover event Infinite Crisis, a new Batwoman appeared on the scene. Now, technically this Batwoman did have the same name, though she would go by Kate Kane as opposed to Kathy Kane, and any relation to Betty Kane, aka Flamebird, appears to have been severed in the process. Also, this new Batwoman was not a potential love interest for Batman. Kate Kane was a lesbian and former girlfriend of prominent Gotham police detective Renee Montoya. Batwoman would prove to be popular enough to survive DC's New 52 reboot, where she would enter into a relationship with another officer of the law, Maggie Sawyer. Of course, there wasn't only one person to ever hold the mantle of Batgirl. In fact, the next one up is probably the one you all know. In an attempt to garner more female interest in the new Batman TV series starring Adam West and Burt Ward, executive producer William Dozier suggested that a new Batgirl be introduced and have her be the daughter of the Gotham City Police Commissioner, Jim Gordon. And that's how Barbara Gordon came into being. She debuted in Detective Comics issue number 359, and a few months later on the Batman television show, where she'd be portrayed by the late Yvonne Craig. Barbara's characterization was a little bit different in both mediums. In the comics, she was a burgeoning feminist with a PhD in library science and quite proficient in martial arts. On the television show, she rarely engaged in any combat, awfully simply perching on a raised platform and kicking evildoers in the face lackadaisically. The Barbara Gordon incarnation of Batgirl proved to be quite popular, though the TV series would actually be cancelled shortly after she debuted. Barbara, or Babs as she would come to be called, would continue in solo adventures, appearing in backup stories in Detective Comics and Brave and the Bold. She would even serve in Congress while still continuing a career as a crime fighter. 1988 would prove to be a fateful year for Barbara Gordon. In a special one-shot issue, she gave up the mantle of Batgirl and retired to a life as a librarian. Then came a story called The Killing Joke, and... No, that one! The Killing Joke was a graphic novel by Alan Moore and Brian Boland. In the story, the Joker initiated a plan to prove to Batman that one bad day could turn anyone into a psychopath. He went to Barbara's apartment and knocked on her door. It was then that he shot her. He then followed the act by removing Barbara's robe and photographing her naked body. The Joker then kidnapped Jim Gordon and showed the Commissioner the documented evidence of his actions. Batman came to the Commissioner's rescue, but the incident left Barbara paralyzed. The paralysis wouldn't affect Barbara Gordon for long, as even though the door in her Batgirl career was closed, a new one would open. Babs would go on to train her computer skills and become Oracle, the master hacker of the DC Universe, initially working for the U.S. government's Task Force X program, aka the Suicide Squad, and eventually moving on to Batman and the Justice League. Barbara would work from the Gotham Clock Tower and dispense information and documentation to aid the fight in justice. Now, in 2011, DC Comics famously rebooted their universe, and one of the goals was to try to get characters back into their more iconic roles. This meant that Barbara Gordon would return to being Batgirl. Her paralysis was explained as being only temporary. Now, just because Barbara Gordon was back in the role of Batgirl doesn't mean there wasn't a Batgirl in between that. In 1999, DC had a special year-long crossover event amongst the Batman titles called No Man's Land. The story revolved around a massive earthquake striking Gotham City and martial law having to be declared. Batman and several of his partners attempted to keep order in the lawless environment of the city when they happened across a mute teenager with exceptional fighting skills named Cassandra Cain. It was soon revealed that Cassandra was actually an agent working for Oracle. Cassandra was initially presented as the adopted daughter of an assassin named David Cain, though it would later be revealed that David Cain was in fact her biological father the whole time. And Cassandra was raised to become the ultimate killer. David Cain raised Cassandra by not ever speaking to her, not teaching her to read language, and without contact from any other humans except those he chose to help her fight. Instead, he honed her fighting skills and her ability to read body language. When she turned 8 years old, David took the young girl out on her first hit. However, the plan backfires. Cassandra was so traumatized by the event that she ran away. After seeing her actions in No Man's Land, Batman and Oracle gave their blessing for Cassandra to become a new Batgirl, with Barbara Gordon working as her teacher. The next year, Cassandra Cain became the first Batgirl to ever get her own solo comic book series. The series would revolve around Cassandra's adventures as Batgirl as she tried to also balance integration into society. Early on in the series, Cassandra would gain the ability to speak, though it would be at the cost of some of her fighting and body language reading skills. This led to her having to be retrained by Batman and Oracle in combat. It was certainly a unique premise, as even though Cassandra was between the ages of 17 and 20 and had the physical body of an adult, albeit a body with some wear and tear on it, her mental maturity was more like that of an early adolescent. Seriously, there was one storyline in which Barbara wanted to take a cruise with Cassandra, and they two argued over whether or not she would wear a bikini. Eventually, Cassandra would relocate to the city of Bloodhaven with Tim Drake, aka the Third Robin. Unfortunately, after one adventure, Tim thought it would be best if the two just worked apart. This would turn out to be a blessing in disguise, as Cassandra would go on to form a small group of friends, even having a love interest or two along the way. And thus, she began to achieve some semblance of a normal life. This is basically where we pick up Cassandra Cain for today's story of the Random Trade Review. Now, I am aware that there are a couple of Batgirls I have skipped over, so we're going to touch briefly upon them right now. The first would be Helena Bertinelli, who many of you might know as the Huntress. The Huntress tended to be rather ruthless at times, even trying to kill villains on occasion, which did not earn Batman's approval. She did briefly assume the mantle of Batgirl during the No Man's Land storyline, but soon renounced it due to her philosophical differences with Batman. Due to the fact she's better known as the Huntress, I feel it better to cover a lot of her backstory in a more Huntress-centric story, and not like this one. Then there would be Stephanie Brown, who became Batgirl after Cassandra Cain. Steph had a few different hero personas, most notably the Spoiler, and her backstory gets a little complicated, and I'll touch a little bit on that later. Not to mention, since Stephanie takes up the role of Batgirl after Cassandra Cain, it really doesn't make too much sense to start covering her when she hasn't inherited the mantle yet. And with that, the stage is now set. Join us in part 2 for Batgirl, Destruction's Daughter. help support my work at patreon.com/sleepytimeforcatproductions, where you can request a trade to be placed in the randomizer, aka the cardboard box.